Good morning and welcome. I'm Kathy Stershic, Vice President at W2 Communications. We are a marketing and strategic communications firm that focuses on cybersecurity, B2G, and the most fun part, space and satellite. And I am the resident space geek at the firm, so I am really excited to be hosting today's discussion with four leading space journalists about their key takeaways from two recent major conferences and to get their perspectives on the state of the space market. With us today are Jacqueline Feldscher, Managing Editor of Payload and the author of Polaris, Payload's weekly space policy newsletter. Previously, she was Senior National Correspondent at Defense One and the National Security and Space Reporter at Politico. She's been a reporter in D.C. for more than a decade, including time spent at the Washington Examiner, the Washington Times, and the Navy Times. Next, we have Mike Gruss, Chief Content and Strategy Officer at Space News. Previously, he was editor-in-chief of Sightline Media Group, where he led Defense News and the Military Times. And this is his second stint at Space News because he worked there previously from 2013 to 2016 as a space reporter. And then we have Rachel Jewett, Senior Managing Editor of Via Satellite, who reports on the commercial satellite industry, covering trends in connectivity, finance, regulations, and more. She also manages Via Satellite's website and magazine and hosts the On Orbit podcast. And we are happy to have Maria Varmazis, the host of the T-Minus Space Daily, a leading podcast delivering daily intelligence briefings and interviews for space professionals, 500 episodes and counting. Maria has a strong background in tech journalism and cybersecurity, combining sharp analysis with approachable conversational interviews to connect the dots between space, cyber, and emerging tech. So welcome to you all. Before we get started, I just want to give a real quick big shout out to our co-sponsors, the Mobile Satellite Users Association, the Washington Space Business Roundtable, NVC Business, and the Dulles Regional Chamber of Commerce, and also to our producer partner today, BLC Digital Strategies, here in beautiful McLean, Virginia. If anybody in the audience has a question for any of these well-informed experts, please post it in the Q&A panel, and we'll save a little time for questions toward the end of the discussion. So with that, could you each just give a very quick overview of your background, just 30 seconds, and your current focus on space? Jacqueline, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I've been with Payload for about 2.5 years. I'm the managing editor, so everything you see in your inbox or our editorial events, I have some hand in, which is very exciting. I've been covering space since about 2017. And for anyone who maybe isn't familiar with Payload, we are a media startup. We cover the business and policy of space and publish a daily newsletter Monday through Friday on the industry.
Great. Maria?
Yes, hi, I'm the host of T-Minus Space Daily. We are a daily space intelligence podcast. We are part of the N2K CyberWire team, and my emphasis is on cybersecurity in space, especially because my background is in cybersecurity. But I've been doing the host job at T-Minus Space Daily for about 2 years now. So I am a lifelong space geek who has a cybersecurity background, who is now working on both. So I'm sort of doing my dream job.
Great, thank you. Mike, a little bit about your background?
Sure. I've been a journalist for about a little over 25 years. Started in local newspapers, but then in 2013 joined Space News and have covered national security space. I've stayed in that arena, I guess, for the last 12 or 13 years. Came back in November and have a hand, like Jacqueline said, in the newsletters, the events, the website, the print issues, everything. So Space News has been around since about 1989. We cover the business, the technology, the politics of space, and having a great time.
Great, thank you. And Rachel?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I've been with Via Satellite for about 5.5 years, and this is my first, I joined the space industry with Via Satellite. Before that, for anybody local in DC, I was with the Washington Post Express, rest in peace. And yeah, Via Satellite, we really focus on the commercial satellite industry, reporting on the whole value chain there. We've got a daily newsletter, monthly magazine, podcast, all the webinars, all the things. So I'm working on a lot of those products.
Lots of fun stuff. So we had these two big shows, Satellite 2025 and Space Symposium, that have happened in the last month, basically. What struck you as different from last year? Anything new, anything exciting? Anyone want to start? I'll call on you. Maria, you're smiling. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, I was not at Satellite, but I was at Symposium. This was my second year at Symposium. There was quite a bit of scuttlebutt this year about a drop in attendance compared to last year. It wasn't plainly obvious to me if that was the case just from walking around the floor. It still was quite crowded. It felt just as energetic as last year to me anyway. But the big change that I noticed was, again, anecdotally, but I saw a lot more presence from European and Middle Eastern partners walking around the floor. The attitude from a lot of American partners was things are business as usual, lots of things going on there. But there was, to me, a marked increase in activity from not just European conglomerates, but also individual nations, and more presence there overall. So people seemed quite busy in that arena.
Interesting. Jacqueline, anything stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think one difference at Satellite specifically, I also didn't notice a large difference in attendance at Symposium. It was Broadmoor still felt very crowded, still ran into a lot of the same usual faces. But at Satellite, that was very much not the case. And I don't know if it was the venue being in DC that kind of led to more of those discussions, but it felt like there was a lot more of kind of the conversations about, the chaos in DC and kind of what it meant for the industry at Satellite. This was also the first year that the Satellite show included a new military track. It previously has gotten some sort of pushback for being very focused on the telecom industry specifically, not really catering to a lot of the new players. So this was really an attempt by the show to broaden its scope and bring in more of the military customers to speak to the industry.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the Satellite Show is part of the same company that Via Satellite is with. We're like on the same team. And yeah, this was the first year for GovMil Space. I don't work directly on the show, but from what I heard from everybody and from talking to some folks in the industry at Symposium last week, that they really appreciated the added focus on government and military issues with the GovMil Space program. I felt the same way, that I thought that both shows seemed crowded, and I feel like people were unsure if there would be as many people at Space Symposium as previous years, but I had the same reaction, that I felt like both shows were crowded. And I think there's definitely some more uncertainty this year, but like Maria said, it seems like people are operating as business as usual and just trying to make sense of what the changes are going to mean for them. But it sounds like everybody was very busy and moving forward on everything.
Okay. Mike, anything jump out at you?
I think from a tone perspective, I would say people at both shows were excited about potential opportunities. They see a lot of optimism for space. They see a lot of opportunities for new contracts within government. But I think at the same time, folks are very anxious. They don't know exactly what government workforce is going to look like. They don't know what these contracting offices are going to look like. So I think there's excitement in saying, hey, we could be a winner here. There could be some new money coming our way. But I think there's also a lot of questions, particularly privately, when people are going, what's going on and how is this going to work?
Okay. I don't want to jump ahead, but I do have a couple of questions around that topic more. But just for the moment, what would you say were the most newsworthy moments at either or both conferences? There's been a lot of partnership announcements. There's, focus on policy issues, international. I know you noted. So,
I can
don't know
start
if
off
there
here.
were.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah.
Sure. I was just gonna say I don't know that there were a ton of surprises, maybe at either show. I think particularly at Symposium, it feels like we've said this for a number of years, but maybe the bluntness with which folks are talking about military operations in space, I think that's probably been one of the big themes that's been going on for an awful long time, and it feels like every year maybe it gets a little more specific or a little more dire depending on your outlook. I think maybe there were a few contract announcements at Satellite. I think we kind of as insidery and as this is, but I think maybe we chuckled. It's both SES and Intelsat were both investing in the same company, and like the Rocket Lab buying Mynaric. But I don't know that there was huge news at either, but a lot of it's, like I said, thematic and probably symposium more along the military side.
Yeah, I
Jacqueline, were you
think
going to jump in?
the big thing that jumped out to me, I also had, I think, Mike, you were referencing General Whiting's comments, probably the most explicit we've heard so far about weapons in space. But another thing that really jumped out to me was the Golden Dome effort, and seeing a lot of space companies start to position towards that. We saw Booz Allen roll out a plan in between the two shows. L3 Harris previewed their plan while at Symposium. Reuters had a story just out this morning about how SpaceX is putting together a team. I heard from a couple other companies on background that they're starting the process. So I think in some ways the talk of a missile defense system for America came from out of left field for people who might not have been paying attention, but the industry has really heard that and run with it. And is starting to put together offerings that they're pitching to the Defense Department. And that was a theme that we were tracking during Symposium especially.
Echoes of Star Wars. Rachel, Maria, anything jump out at you?
Honestly, Mike and Jacqueline summed it up pretty well.
Okay.
In the SATCOM world, like Mike said, particularly SES's partnership with Link, I think with SES and Intelsat set to combine later this year, that's going to be very interesting to like what that combined company looks like and what the impact is on the overall value chain. And I think everybody's trying to figure out what their play in direct to devices, because there's a couple of ways that companies can offer that service. So I think that, and Link is one that demonstrated the capability very early on, but hasn't really like scaled up. So that was interesting to me in the SATCOM world.
Okay. Well, several of you have, I'm sorry, Maria, were you about to say something?
I think honestly, everyone covered it really well. I was very. The thing that stood out to me was how much the messaging was different depending on who you spoke to, especially on the military side of things. From representatives from the United States were very, ducks in the water, everything's normal, don't worry about what's going on. And when I had a lot of off-the-record chats with representatives from other nations, that was not at all what they were saying. So that shift in tone was very interesting to me. But I think as everyone else has noted, we are going to see as that plays out, especially as discussions are getting more explicit. So it's going to be interesting to follow that.
Okay. So both of those events are typically heavily attended by government representatives. I personally noticed there were not that many at the satellite show, even though it was right here in DC. How was the attendance in Colorado? Are people still traveling for the government?
Yeah, I mean, I think
the NASA
think
booth was pretty empty.
The NASA, I'm sorry?
The NASA booth was very diminished compared to previous years, is what I noticed.
Okay. Mike, you were saying?
No, I think that's right. I think there maybe we didn't see I think in part just because where we are in the timing of this administration, we didn't see as many high-profile NASA speakers as maybe we have in years past. There were still some, but maybe not the quantity.
Okay.
I thought the showing from the government was pretty good. Like it wasn't that far off. I think it's satellite. I know there were, again, earlier in the administration, I think the NRO packed up their booth or maybe didn't show up early, but there was less than I think we all expected to see at satellite.
Okay. Were you able to talk with any federal sources during the show? I know you've said, a couple of you have said there's the party line of business as usual, but then you're having sort of side conversations, anything more about the pulse of those discussions?
Yeah, I mean, I know I can speak for myself. I was certainly able to, meet with staffers from some of the agencies. I think my experience in requesting interviews with the high level officials was that their schedule was largely taken up by, meetings with international officials. We didn't see the same pace in the media briefing room, I don't believe. Having people come and address the press after, I felt like they were really trying to make the most of their time there, having meetings with, other officials other than press. I will say that there was, as Mike noted, satellite was kind of earlier. I think there was a lot more, confusion about what these orders meant. Before symposium, the military put out something saying this is essential, this is really important to us. So I think in the month between the two shows, the government definitely got some answers about what is essential travel, what they should be doing, and it definitely felt to me like there was a large military presence for sure.
Okay. Any thoughts
I would agree with that
on?
also. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just ditto. Sorry. Yeah, the military presence was not diminished at all. But yeah, the federal discussions were largely off the record and diminished compared to last year.
Okay. I'm very interested in this whole, like you saw a lot of European and even Middle Eastern participants there, and kind of what, there's a lot of partnerships and collaboration going on. I know there's an international voice that we must maintain cooperative efforts. Space is a shared resource. Just any thoughts on where the international dynamic is at that you might have picked up?
I think the word sovereignty has been used a lot in the past few years, but even more so this year. I feel like we're hearing more open calls from the EU and from, players over there that Europe needs to have its own capabilities and not rely on Starlink. We've also seen smaller nations make their own investments into satellite communications. Like just this week, we saw Taiwan make an investment for an Astronus geosatellite. So I think that one of the biggest themes is countries want to have, ownership and control of their own communications.
Okay. Maria, any other thoughts? I know you in particular mentioned that stood out to you.
Yeah, a lot of these conversations were off the record, or as always, what happens when the interview ends and the best stuff comes out after the recorder turns off. But a lot of the conversations were, especially in relation to what's going on in the United States. Many of the international folks that I spoke with said, basically, if I tell you something today, by tomorrow that information will be incorrect. So we honestly don't know what to say, and we're a little hesitant to say anything much at all. So it's there. I completely echo what Rachel says also about sovereignty is huge. But there's also that uncertainty that federal folks are feeling, and U.S. suppliers feels amplified by international partners as they're trying to figure out exactly where the ground is underneath their feet.
So SpaceX, I'm sure, was the 800-pound gorilla in the conference center. At Satellite 2025, there were some complementary points of view. They do some really exciting stuff. But there was also an undercurrent around Mr. Musk and his current role in the government. Any sentiment on possible shifts to either decreasing U.S. government-centric opportunities for other SATCOM providers, or maybe increased opportunities for them outside of the U.S.?
I mean, it depends on who you talk to, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jen.
Go ahead,
Mike.
Mike.
Oh.
Okay. We're too polite.
Mike, go ahead.
I'll just say, yeah, I think it depends on who you talk to, and that there are folks who say, I think particularly with the government, that they are nervous no matter what when there's reliance on one supplier for too much. And I think that's separate from any of the politics that go along with Elon Musk. And I think, as proof, we saw that years ago with when United Launch Alliance had a large number of launch shares for national security missions. I think at the same time, and this is what Rachel was saying, we've heard more and more, particularly from Europe, that hey, we don't want to be tied to one country and being kind of at the whims of one administration. So I think there's been a lot of interest there, and then I think building on that, there's also been, I think what we heard at symposium is that there's going to be likely increased investment from NATO countries, that some of that money will likely go toward space programs, and folks are thinking about that as well. But yes, SpaceX is definitely the elephant in the room. I'll tell you, our last print issue was dedicated almost entirely to how do folks compete with SpaceX, because it's become an issue for almost every company and how they fit into that ecosystem.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I wanted to highlight during Satellite, the ULA CEO, Tory Bruno, had a roundtable where he was asked about, how he felt that one of his biggest competitors had like a senior position in the government. And his line, of course, the party line, that he trusts the government to be fair in the competitions. But as we're going through a lot of these questions, it's very much like a question mark, right? Like everyone's kind of watching it and in a wait and see posture. It's early in the administration. There were a lot of changes early on, and I feel like on the issue of how Elon's role plays into SpaceX's opportunities, much like a lot of other things we've talked about, that there's a lot of kind of waiting and seeing before people are willing to act on any potential thing, because they just don't know how stuff is going to go.
Sure.
And I think
Let's
on the
talk about
symposium side, what was interesting is SpaceX was also the lanyard sponsor, and that got a lot of chatter around the prop war of people going, "What's up with that?" So they're
Everyone
just a little anecdote, but it was interesting to see people's reaction to that.
Okay.
And folks not wearing their lanyard because of that.
Oh.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of this lack of clarity at the moment about kind of where government-centric things are heading. But let's face it, space is fun. There's a lot of optimism. There's a lot of excitement about what's going on. I'm personally am very bullish on this whole thing. What was the good stuff? What were the good moments? Did you see anything new, anything fun, anything really geeky? Maria, you're smiling knowingly.
I feel like I'm talking a lot. I mean, at Symposium, the vast demo was everybody had to get their selfie at that. That was a lot of fun just to see it's only a model, but just going in to see what an actual commercial space station module would look like and being in that physical space. Of course, that's fun. We all nerded out about that. And there was an actual red carpet leading up to it. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that people send home to their family to go, this is cool. This is what I do for a living. But yeah, that to me was the highlight.
Okay.
Yeah, I also was going to highlight VAST. There were also a number of really cool rovers that people had set up on the floor. The thing, if you're looking for something to be optimistic about, so much of this technology, the space station technology, the rover technology, there was a refueling contract between Astroscale and Orbit Fab and a DoD satellite. These technologies that were once thought of as like, oh, this is really far in the future, like I saw a model of the vast space station, right? Like even if these things are delayed, there's money behind them. Like it feels like we're at a tipping point where some of this really cool tech is at the point where even if it's not happening, operationally or on a regular cadence, like they are going to try refueling 2 satellites and kind of go to a gas station in between. So those sorts of missions, becoming a reality is really exciting.
Yeah,
Rachel,
Orbit
any
Fab
thoughts?
had an event at their headquarters, right? For Symposium. That was really neat.
I would like to see those pictures of you standing at the commercial space station. Please share.
Will do.
Yeah, there was a line. I mean, when I was leaving on Thursday, there was still a line around the corner of people trying to get into the commercial space station. So yeah, there is a ton of excitement. I mean, everybody. I was honestly surprised at how much enthusiasm there was at both shows. But there's so much opportunity. Both of these shows bring together companies from around the world. There are companies that were small companies just a few years ago, and to see them scale up and be really demonstrating technologies and moving forward, there's just so much excitement.
Space sustainability and debris management. I know that's been a hot topic lately. Was there any discussion on those, sessions on those that anyone attended? That's certainly an international issue. So are there solutions that you think are going to be most effective in the long-term viability for solving those problems?
I mean, I think there's this criticism of the space industry, space community as a whole, that space moves slowly, and maybe this is the issue that maybe best exemplifies that, because people love to talk about it. I think there's so many groups and organizations that are dedicated to trying solving this problem, but when it comes to getting everyone on board, it's really, really hard, and it's moving really slowly. So it's not to say that there's not optimism there, but I think especially at the rate of launch cadence, where there's so many more satellites than there were even just a couple months ago, a couple years ago, that I think that yes, this issue becomes more important, but it seems like the ability to get everyone on board and follow the same guidelines becomes more difficult.
And internationally, I mean, China not sharing data. I mean, to be honest, I don't know. This is a huge issue with just all of the more and more satellites going up there. I saw a really cool demo from ExoAnalytic at Symposium where they were showing how they had mapped a Chinese satellite's maneuvers in space. And I was like, that's crazy. I don't know how you defend. It's just a really difficult issue.
I think the Space ISAC is trying to garner some international cooperation around that. I'm not sure who else might be working on that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they just had a whole announcement this week about their collaboration in the UK, if I remember correctly. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, they're working in Australia. Over the past year, they've expanded partnerships with so many countries around the world. So they're really taking a global approach to cybersecurity for space.
It's fantastic.
Cyber is another important issue. I know earlier in the conversation it was mentioned that there's a lot of military engagement in this arena now, and everybody's kind of looking at it as a contested environment. Cyber is certainly very important. Any insights on new developments? Any new concerns?
I can start on this one.
Sure.
I don't know if I saw necessarily huge changes, but it's a bit of a culture shift is sort of what I'm starting to notice. There has been a long time of reliance on basically I'm working with the U.S. federal government, so I'm okay. I'm following those standards. I'm fine. Whereas folks in the cybersecurity market have been saying that's not going to cover you, especially if you're commercial. There seems to be a lot more acceptance of that and understanding of that. So there's moving ahead in the maturity on cybersecurity understanding has been encouraging. Certainly not just at Symposium, but I was also at Commercial Space Week in Florida in January, and I'm seeing a small but increased presence of software security players who are coming to space events and understanding that their solutions are also needed. So gap is not unbridged. There is some cross functionality happening there. So that to me is very encouraging. I still think there's a lot of reliance on federal standards, and that conversation is still ongoing, but the commercial market seems to definitely be understanding that they have to really step up here and not rely on that to cover them.
Yeah, I would follow on to what Maria said. So at the satellite group, we have a show called CyberSat in Reston in November. And so we had a banner for that at our booth at Space Symposium. And we had a lot of people coming up to us and asking questions about CyberSat. And I noticed that some of the people, like Maria said, are not necessarily in the space industry, but they work at cyber companies and they are trying to figure out how they can serve the space industry. So I think that there's just more and more of space recognizing that it needs cyber, and cyber recognizing that space is a good market.
Yeah,
I think the turning point to the last couple of years we've seen, particularly after Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia's it's been pretty well documented by both U.S. and European officials that Russia hacked Viasat on the day of the Ukraine invasion, and so many folks have come to see that as that cyber will be a precursor to any kind of space or kinetic battle going forward. So I think to me that's been one of the turning points the last couple of years. But I'd also say this is an area that's probably not getting the attention it deserves, and until there are, unfortunately, probably more examples like that, we won't see that level of emphasis.
Yeah, coming from the cybersecurity world, it's been very interesting that many folks in cybersecurity have been paying attention to space for actually quite a long time. But the opposite has not necessarily been true. But again, that gap is being bridged more and more. So definitely watch that space.
Anyone jump out at you as somebody who's going to be a leader in that environment?
Gosh, I don't want to name names yet.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
it's really yet to see on
Never mind. Not a fair question. What about multi-orbit? That's a hot topic, but how close are we or aren't we to true multi-orbit capabilities?
I can start with this one.
Sure.
One of the panels that Caleb Henry, formerly at Via Satellite, formerly SpaceNews, now with Quilty Space, he moderated one on the first day of Satellite that was about multi-orbit services. And he asked them to rate the developments in terminals and services. And people were like average to low. So there's so much conversation and activity here, but it's just like not quite there yet. The combination of the terminals and the service and the network management that pulls it all together, it's like it's been a conversation for years, and like now there are, it's operational in some cases, but it's not like, I don't think it's not the utopia that people are saying it can't be. It's not there yet.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
I just throw. I know one of our writers, Jason Rainbow, just did a story recently about some of the, I would say, counterintuitive pushback there, where a multi-orbit terminal, would actually, it's a single point of failure, and that creates problems for folks, and where you would think, oh, we're saving time, we're saving money, we're saving space, that it's actually the opposite, and so. Like Rachel said, I think there may be some enthusiasm, but it's not. I don't think it's where a lot of folks expected it to be right now.
And multi-orbit means it can mean a lot of different things. Like, is it a single terminal that works with multiple orbits? Are there two terminals used in a situation? Is multi-orbit GEO and MEO? Is LEO involved? I don't know. And that is going to mean different things in different ways that companies are putting solutions together.
Let's talk a little bit about launch demand, because it's outstripping capacity, and it has been for a while. That's not news, but I've recently read that that's even the case with processing payload at major spaceports, which backs everything up. So any thoughts on how the industry or the government is addressing that?
Yeah, I mean, at Symposium, we definitely saw there were booths from a number of different states. I know this is at least Oklahoma's second year having an event talking about kind of their space industry and wanting to launch from there. I know I attended a Texas lunch that was definitely, more broadly about, it was broader than just launch in terms of space in the state. But I think we're seeing a lot of, states step up and say, we want to build a spaceport, we want to help solve this problem. I think anyone who has paid any attention to this industry has seen a lot of states and a lot of spaceports struggle with that. So it's definitely easier said than done. But I don't really see, I don't hear anyone talking about building another federal launch range or another military launch range. I think, the Cape is obviously ramping up, but at some point they're going to hit their limit, and we're definitely seeing private spaceports in states across the country. Maine is another one, kind of trying to fill this gap.
I guess they have to be in fairly remote areas in case, although not in Florida.
It's going to be expensive, right? I mean, that's the big
Yeah.
issue here. It's all of this is
Yeah.
expensive, and it's infrastructure that's going to take years and lots of money, and that's I feel like I've been the wet blanket for a lot of this conversation, but like it's hard to see where some of that money is going to come from, and so as much as it's needed, that does not. If I was betting, I would not say that that's a problem that gets solved in the next 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
Yeah, infrastructure notoriously not a fast investment. I heard a number of mentions of sea-based launch, which keeps coming up now and then. I mean,
Interesting.
That's been around for a long time. I just, it's one of those ideas that just keeps getting kicked around, and I always wonder how viable that is. But it's interesting to hear that get mentioned, not necessarily from people who are trying to get that built, but from other people who are hoping that maybe it's going to be viable. So we'll see on that one too.
Okay. So you're all reporters. There's a lot of companies entering this market at this point. How do you prioritize who and what to cover? Like, what makes a compelling organization to watch?
I think I can start off kind of talking about how we think about it at Payload. I think, we're definitely looking for real ideas with real technology and real milestones. And yes, we all love covering the pie in the sky thing that's like a very futuristic idea, and we certainly do some of those. But overall, we try to ideas that are, getting real funding, are hitting milestones, and are, poised to make a difference in the industry.
Okay. Rachel, who you watching?
Yeah, I mean, real
How are you
money,
watching?
like
Real
real
money.
contracts, not just an MOU or an agreement to think about working together, but real purchases of goods and services. Because there's a lot of hype, and I would just, yeah, it can be a challenge to like cut through the hype sometimes. I think that the space industry has its own PR problem of not knowing how to talk about itself, or trying to like generate buzz when it isn't necessarily warranted. So yeah, I agree with what Jacqueline said there.
So how could they be better about talking about themselves? Just too much hype?
So sometimes I read a press release and I'm like, what actually happened? What are you doing? Like sometimes it's so convoluted that this company is the blah 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 blah, and it's like, no, really, what is going on here?
Yeah, I feel like the emphasis on the real is such an important word that keeps coming up, because we're not asking that the tech be TRL9. We just, there are a lot of really cool ideas out there, and a lot of them are never going to go anywhere, and that's okay. But it becomes really plain when you speak to somebody that if they don't have any kind of business plan at all, it's kind of painfully obvious. So given what I do, I'm on a podcast. I like to have a human story if at all possible, but really it's the angle is, again, the word real. It's very fun to talk about the theoretical stuff, the Star Trek stuff. I mean, I'm a geek. I love that kind of thing, but that's not going to really help my audience. It has to be something that's got a plan. Just technology alone is not going to get you there.
Okay.
I would just second what folks have said about the real contracts, customers, like those are really important. But I'd take it a step further and say it has to be a good story, and like part of that includes people, and I think this is a Washington problem and not necessarily a space problem, but folks are so hesitant to have compelling people with compelling stories, talking about what they're doing, why there's, all of the central elements of a good story. Where is the conflict? What has this person overcome? What has the technology overcome? What could you do now that you couldn't do before? And like that's, I don't, in a way, like that. Those are the best. Those are the best pieces when you can find someone who, just think about like your high school literature classes. Like, do they meet that basic definition? Is it man versus self? Self versus self, man versus technology, whatever it is, and try and figure that. And I just think there's so many pitches that have forgotten that it needs to be a story. It needs to be good and interesting and something you'd want to tell your spouse about or your kid. And I think that's, I think sometimes we just get so heads down that we forget about that.
We need a good hero's journey, sounds like.
There you go.
That's one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, what's the real world
One thing I
impact? That's exactly.
I'd add one thing to what Mike said. That's such a good point. Is that it's also not. It shouldn't always be the CEO that's talking. Some of them, we want to hear from the people that are like on the ground building the technology, or they're the one that made that interesting sale happen. The people that are, making the connections to push the technology forward. I just think it shouldn't always be the CEO that's the voice for a company.
Interesting.
That's right.
If I can just add on to that for a quick
please.
second, I'll tell you, years ago, I was working on a story, and again, this sounds so incredibly in the weeds, but the Air Force testified before Congress, and buried in the written testimony was a piece about how a young airman had basically solved the GPS problem and made it, much easier to produce and more accurate. Great, like that's a fascinating story. And then when I called the Air Force to say, like, hey, can we talk to this guy? They're like, why do you want to talk to him? I was like, you just testified about him in front of Congress. Like, why would I not want to talk to him? And it was just like, it was so hard to even get him on the phone and learn about, hey, why this was important. But it was important enough to put in documentation in Congress. So I think that, to me, that kind of exemplifies the problem that we face sometimes in finding those good stories. And we're all busy, and so it's hard to do that extra work to get those types of stories. But I think all of us really want to do them too.
Great. We do have quite a few questions from the audience, but before we turn to those, I just want to ask if you have any predictions on what to expect in the next year to 2 years for this market.
Looking ahead to 2026, I am really keeping a close eye on the commercial LEO destination market. So the commercial space station market to take over after the ISS. There are 3 or 4 different companies competing to build the ISS replacement. I don't think personally that a market right now supports 3 to 4 commercial space stations. So, looking at the winners and losers there, looking at kind of passing the mantle on like human habitation in LEO from the government to commercial, and how commercial entities are trying to replicate those international ties that have made the International Space Station so important. I know we're supposed to see a couple companies launching their first modules in 2026 next year. So I think, and we're, rapidly getting towards 2030 when the ISS is supposed to be retired. So that's definitely, an area of the industry that I'm excited about watching. I think it's going to be really dynamic and interesting over the next 12 to 18 months.
Okay. Rachel, what are you predicting?
One of the things I'm interested in watching, and not necessarily positive, is how the tariffs and trade war impact the space industry, in the next year or so. I think that people are still figuring out what that means. Maybe companies have primarily a US-based supply chain, but raw materials are probably coming from other countries. And everyone's really positive about the activity moving forward, but this could really uh, slow down the supply chain that could cause a lot of problems with deliveries and milestones.
Absolutely.
Mike, what's in your crystal ball?
I would add on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maria.
No, it's okay. I would add on to that. Space does follow geopolitics so closely, and as Rachel mentioned, the tariffs are going to have a serious impact on domestic supply chain issues. I think for a lot of my focus is going to be definitely on the international strategy shift that we are already seeing underway. I think the United States especially has figured we're the only really big game in town. No matter what happens, people have to come to us. And I'm not sure how much longer that will necessarily be true. So, of course, I want it to be true, but who knows? I think it's something to keep an eye on. As we mentioned earlier, sovereignty becomes an even more important issue for our international partners, where the alignments of power shift to.
Thanks.
Continuing my wet blanket theme, I guess my prediction is that the expected surge in government contracts to commercial companies and startups is not nearly as large as folks are expecting. That money may not be enough to get folks through the valley of death and some of the other common startup problems. But there will be money. There will be new players, but it's not going to be to the size and scale that people are expecting.
Okay, let's look at the questions then. This is for all the panelists. Who among you are using satellite technology today? And please explain how you are using it, if you are.
GPS on my phone.
So, yeah.
Was this a pop quiz?
Unfortunately, I bought a new iPhone like a few months before Apple rolled out the satellite feature, so I have the generation before that, so I can't do satellite messaging when I'm out of range of cellular connectivity, so I don't have that capability right now.
Let's see. Is there, we've already covered the SpaceX having an unfair advantage. So I think we've decided the jury's still out on that. Anyone disagree? Okay, when you're attending conferences, what do you look for from vendors? And do you have any advice for how vendors can engage with you before, during, or even after an event?
I'd throw out, particularly symposium that, and I know, I'm guessing everyone here has had the same experience. That is a week with dozens, and that's not an exaggeration, probably dozens of meetings for everyone. And so, I've always laughed when folks are like, Mike, we should get coffee while we're at the Broadmoor. And it's like, you live down the street from me. Like, why are we getting coffee in Colorado Springs when we can do it the 51 other weeks of the year that maybe aren't so crowded? So I think it's being purposeful about why we're meeting up, and it might be an embargo but it's understanding that there is a glut of news, and it's hard to sort through it, and it's hard to prioritize it and to see where the themes are. And so part of that is having that relationship with the reporter and talking beforehand and saying, here's what we're going to be talking about, or here's what we're expecting to talk about. And I think that's helpful. But I think, and this is a very beginner tip, and we don't see this a lot, but it's like, hey, you should come by our booth. And it's like, for what? It's like, oh, well, we can just, show you stuff. And it's like what? And are you going to be there? Is there going to be someone on the record to talk to? There's been so many times when I or someone from our team has come to a booth, and there's an incredible demonstration, and like legitimately a newsworthy demonstration, but I can't go on the record. I'm not allowed to talk. Oh, was there a PR person I can talk to about this? No, they're at they didn't make it to the show. So it's those kind of gaps, I think, that can be frustrating and then leads to a waste of time, which in an already busy week kind of can feel amplified.
Yeah,
Or
I
when
was going to
it's
pick up on
somebody-
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, when it's an agency person emailing you on behalf of the company and they don't even really, the PR person might not even know the name of the agency person that was emailing you. I don't know. I just feel like there can be so many layers of like confusion. Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, I was going to
Oh,
pick
actually,
up
it was
on,
Jacqueline.
yeah, I was going to pick up on what Mike was saying about the booth issue. That, so often, these companies are reaching out, they want press, but then when you're walking around, if there's not a press person there, no one from the booth will talk to you. So I would encourage PR people to, do media training with your experts beforehand so that you can trust them. If you're going to have them at the booth and you want press, I think equip them to talk to people. And also in terms of, we always get some pushback on weeks like this of why didn't you cover our news? I know our Payload newsroom is 3 people. I don't know the specifics of all these other newsrooms, but these are not very large newsrooms covering all this news. So if we don't cover something, it's not that we don't think it's interesting. It's not that we don't like your company. It truly often is a capacity and a space issue. And if release your news the week after symposium, right? We all need stuff to write this week too. So
Exactly.
there is certainly a danger in getting buried during these big shows.
Yeah,
How long
I
would
would
it take
echo
you
that
to-
completely.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we are also a very small team, so, I love to wander around the show floor with my mic in hand and recorder. It's great to get that live audio from the show floor, but, we can't do everything in that one time and with dozens of meetings on the calendar. So
Sure.
it's okay to say, I don't actually have an announcement this week during symposium. Let's catch up after. Or, we can meet up at the symposium floor off the record. Let's just talk about what you've got coming down the line, and then we can actually set up an interview more formally later. Like, that's completely fine. I'd rather just have that relationship and have that conversation than try to cram it in and have it be low value for both of us.
Thank you. Next question. Since NASA and NOAA intend to move on-premise ground stations to the cloud, and with the current administration's focus on efficiencies, are you hearing a shift towards satellite data as a service that can operate either on-prem or in the cloud to reduce infrastructure? I'm seeing nods. Yes, you're hearing this?
Yes, there certainly is an emphasis there.
Okay.
Not sure what else to add on that, but yes, I've been hearing that.
Okay. Is there a noticeable increase in 3D printing or adaptive manufacturing in the space industry that you've observed or heard anything about? Any update on the viability of relativity space and its 3D printed rockets? That's trippy. "3D printing? No?"
I sort of feel like I've been hearing the 3D printing drumbeat for a number of years. I don't know that I've heard more about it recently or that I've seen anything that necessarily makes me believe it's, closer to becoming a reality.
Okay. Any issues that weren't discussed at either conference that you wish would have been?
I was expecting to see more discussion on stages about uncertainty and tariffs. And, there was some, but I was expecting a little bit more on, on the big stages.
Yeah, why is it that is still such a hush-hush conversation is very interesting to me. Understandable that people are nervous, but it's just that it's not out in the open yet. That in itself feels like a big story.
Interesting. Here's a question. What is the biggest challenge to closing a business case for new space investments, and what is missing? I don't know, is that something you feel you could speak to? Maybe not so much? Okay.
If I knew, I would probably go work at a space startup instead of a media startup.
Seriously, wouldn't be doing this.
Are you seeing growth in quote unquote serious interest and non-government investment in developing and exploiting lunar and cislunar space ecosystem? Or is this still mostly viewed as a government purview?
I would be very curious to hear everyone else's thoughts on how real they think cislunar is.
The
I
same
would just,
thing. I don't. Yeah, I don't cover like we focus really on SATCOM, but I am seeing more about satellite communications around the moon. But again, what I've seen is mostly for government use. So I have not seen a lot of commercial interest, and that's, I think, is one of the big questions: is there any commercial case beyond government? So I'm curious what the other folks have to say.
I think there's a lot of commercial interest for sure. I don't know that there's a lot of money to be made right now, right? Like, we've had 2 commercial landers land on the moon like early this spring. Companies are talking about building power grids on the moon and mining for water ice and like turning the lunar regolith into concretes for this flow of rockets that's going to be taking off and this maze of rovers. So people are actively like pitching the technology and developing the technology, but I don't see the customers for those right now beyond NASA. And I think the hope is that NASA can kind of tide stuff over until there is a commercial industry, but I have not heard anyone really put a benchmark on how far away that is.
Interesting. Here's someone that says they're very interested in the conversation around the concept of sovereignty in space capabilities. With less cooperative efforts and more national infrastructure in space, what developments in the space legal environment might you see happening?
One thing I heard when I talked to people, and this was last year after the Work Spectrum conference, was that as the ITU, it's like, each country is represented, that small countries and regions like, that are not Europe and the US are really important. And just from like rumblings of what I'm seeing some people talk about on LinkedIn is I'm seeing more like activity in these like small regional working groups for the spectrum. They're in the work cycle right now up until the next Spectrum conference. So what I've heard is that there's like more increased interest in getting smaller countries involved and to like have a bigger voice when it comes to the spectrum discussions at
Interesting.
work.
Anybody else? Okay, Mike, here's one just for you. An anonymous attendee asks, when is your next marathon?
This is my wife, but no, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how busy the fall schedule looks. I'm hoping for it, but I appreciate the optimism that I'll be feeling good enough to do one this fall.
Well, we are just about at time. I want to thank you all. This has been a really interesting and well-informed conversation. And just before we close, I'd like to go around once and ask you all the question that you guys like to ask people that you're interviewing. Anything else you'd like to add? Maria.
Just thank you for this great opportunity. Definitely going to be keeping an eye on what's going on internationally, as I've said a bunch of times, but I'm really hoping to see more cybersecurity players stepping up this year. I think their capabilities are very, very needed.
Jacqueline, anything to add?
I think more just like a journalism tip. Sometimes when I say anything else to add, people act like it's a trick question. It's okay to just say no. I just want to make sure we've covered everything. I'm not looking for this new insightful thing. So if a reporter ever asks you that and you think you've covered it all, totally fair to say no.
Okay, great.
That's right.
Well, with that, I think we'll conclude, and thanks again so much. Thank you to everyone in our audience and to our sponsors, and we'll see you at the next show. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.